Shut up. All right, I'll make a deal with you. How many of you were available at 10 a.m.? 10 to 11 or 10 to 11-ish.
I have a class.
But depends how good the deal is. I heard that in his voice. So here's the scoop.
Well, I have a quiz, so is it worth getting?
Well, you can tell me. I don't want you to skip quizzes. I don't want you to skip class. I don't want you to skip quizzes. We have a faculty member on campus today who's applying for our open position. And she's going to be here for chapel. So I actually have to leave at like 8:50 to go meet her at the front door. So she doesn't know where she's going. She's coming up from Chicago. She's giving her guest lecture at 10 a.m. across the hall in S107. And it's going to be on like kind of, like it's going to be on AI, but at a kind of a freshman sophomore level. But I've seen her presentation. It's pretty interesting. And her background, she does research at DePaul University in Chicago specifically on this stuff. So I think it'll be pretty interesting. But, it would be awesome if she didn't have to lecture to an empty room. So if we could have some of you, if you're available at 10, I want to message this entire class and tell them they have to show up to this thing under penalty of death. This is recorded, but I'm admitting to my crime ahead of time. Yeah, I just throw allegedly at the end of it. So if you are available at 10, even if it's only for a half hour or something like that, if you have to bail early, it would be awesome if you showed up to S107 straight across the hallway, right outside of CS at 9:55 a.m. or something like that. She is going to be a fresh PhD, so this is probably her first time teaching. She's probably going to be nervous, so let's make her extra nervous. Well, and most of you are freshmen, so she's potentially going to be your teacher for the next 3 years. So this is your opportunity to have a say whether you want this person in front of you for the next 3 years.
You don't have to say when it comes to that, or is it just like most of this?
Well, why wouldn't you have a say?
How would we have a say?
That's the thing.
Okay.
Take a vote.
Who is in charge of computer science?
You?
So if I'm asking you to go to it and I'm inviting you to give me feedback, then that is how you will have a say, right? Because the more you like your teachers, the less you come and complain to me or appeal grades, and I love that. If I never have to see any of you people again, that's okay. What's this? Well, especially since I'm busy doing other things. I don't want to have to listen to whiny students complain that, oh, I've been caught cheating for the 5th time. It'll never happen again. Like you just told me this 2 weeks ago. You said it'll never happen again. I did not embellish that story. That has happened. It's so bad. All right. So anyways, I need to bail at about 8:50 so I can drop my laptop off and go meet her. We still will be going to chapel at 9:30. I'm going to try to feel out the situation to see if she's willing to sit in the front row, but I don't want to scare her off. I kind of have like I feel like a little bit of like a fatherly connection to her. Like she's coming up with her host mom. She's from Iran. She's here on asylum. She's Christian, but she's coming in with her host mom. And, I have a daughter who's a Vietnamese, but she's grown up. She's a software engineer off and about. So, like I kind of feel like a connection with mom. So I want to make sure she gets taken care of. She's in a new place, blah, blah, blah. So in any case, if I start getting my spidey senses say she's scared of the front row, I'll let her pick her row. But we'll see what happens. But all of you sit with us in chapel. You're more than welcome and encouraged to come sit. You can come and sit wherever we end up, but I'll shoot for front row. We'll see what happens. All right, so let's keep cooking. Well, the deal. I promised the deal, right? If as many of you who are legitimately available, do not skip class for this, but perhaps show up late to a sports practice, I think that would be more reasonable to show up to the 10 a.m. lecture across the hall. If everybody makes a maximum effort to do that without skipping classes, I will not give you homework over the weekend.
Okay, so wait. So I have class at 10:05. So if I show up and I'm present,
No, don't show up for 5 minutes. Go to your class. I'm not asking you to skip class. I'm just asking you to maybe rearrange your social schedule or less important things. Do not skip a class.
so please have everyone raise their hand and we should make them go for us.
That's a great idea.
That's a beautiful idea.
I have faith that this classroom is filled with ethical individuals. And only those who do not have class at that time will make a strong effort to show up at 10 a.m. today across the hall.
So if you show up at 10, we have no homework. Want to sell the bag?
Yeah, if I see bad turnout, you're going to have a random assignment show up on campus. All right. Well, so let's dive in. Everybody understands the deal. We're good. All right. Let's dive in to get us through as much stuff as we. Oh, I don't have crap on. What's going on here? Oh, somebody's waiting here. Let's see. Can I do that without breaking the recording? Ooh, that one's not happy. All right, hold on. I'm recording. We got that. All right. So let's keep trucking here. If I remember correctly, I put a error into our code, right? Just to remind me where we were. I usually will do an error. Hide floating controls. So let's see. We were probably in here. Or at least I put a bunch of asterisks somewhere. This guy? Oh no, that's a little note I left myself.
Yeah, you got rid of one of the brackets on that string already. Private static string, you got rid of the bracket.
Okay, thank you. So that's it, line 10. Okay, all right. All right, pay attention. Okay, so we are working on our get array, and we were thinking about this from a recursive perspective. Ultimately, get array is going to return a string array for us. Now, we did talk last time that this would actually be easier if we were creating objects right now. But because I want us to stumble in how we're going to create objects, we're kind of sort of having to do this with strings. We sort of agreed that we're not going to allow it to go into arrays inside of arrays, because that will then make strings way more difficult to deal with, because then you have to figure out, well, how do I represent a string with a substring? Like, this is technically an object that lives inside of an array underneath this guy. You start getting into string representation issues that's not going to be our final state anyways. We happen to know, because we have human eyes, that we look at this and we don't have arrays inside of arrays. So this is going to be a little bit custom just for our data for our example, but we can always expand it from there. Okay, so when we call get array, we would call get array when we first run into the opening square bracket. We saw last time that, so we get into, so that start pause, this guy would be that one little step in front of that square bracket. All right, so we'll start off, we're going to be collecting our answer. And remember, we talked last time about one of the challenges we have, if you go back to kind of the reason why JSON even exists, or any of these data representation languages like JSON or the older one, XML. If you've ever used if you ever followed a tutorial or something like that, have you ever seen a .yaml file? YAML. So files with a .yaml extension are usually in XML. It's an older technology. It's possible you might have some newer applications that technically have kind of bolted on to their old file structure, who are actually storing JSON in there. But YAML, even just the extension, tells you what's likely in there. Just like .docx. .docx files have XML as the description language, the data representation language inside. Modernly, we typically use JSON, and what JSON brings to the table that XML never did is it brings arrays. Whereas, could you handle collections in XML? Sure, but you had to kind of do two passes. You know, to go through and say, oh, you have a whole bunch of tag-based, people. As you have to go through and read how many tags are there so you can then arbitrarily put them into your own array. So you could still pull it off. It was just more of it was a bolt-on. But anyways, just when you look at file extensions, a lot of times you can predict what might be inside those files. Sometimes it's important, sometimes it's not. But if you've, used Python or something like that ever and use some library for processing through like an Excel document, it knows how to process through an Excel document because it knows the standardized XML that's inside of a Excel document. That's the way it pulls it off. All right. So anyways, because we are technically transitioning from a good data representation language like JSON and kind of temporarily storing it in our little ghetto version of a data representation language of strings separated by this guy, our made up delimiter that we're just hoping, crossing our fingers, that nobody actually has those exact sequence of characters inside of their actual data that's meaningful. Make sense? Because that would be a disqualifier from us. Their data is going to get chopped up if that's the case. But we're going to hope that this is random enough that we're good to go. So as we go through here, we know we're going to start off with answer. We know start pause is one step after the opening square bracket. If we hit a closing square bracket, that means we're done with this array. And if we're done with this array, we're going to take our answer, we're going to split it on our made up delimiter, and that's going to give us a string array with all of the individual strings we read in that are separated based on our crazy delimiter. All right. But that's what happens when we get to the end of the array. So presumably we're not at the end of the array as soon as we got in here. In our little example, we're one step in front of the beginning of the array. So if we're not looking at that, we might be looking at the beginning of one of the objects inside the array. JSON arrays hold JSON objects, where technically a JSON object comes in two flavors, a JSON object or JSON array. Those are the two flavors of JSON objects. We happen to know the nature of our current data is our array is only filled up with other standard JSON objects. So we're going to kind of take that into consideration as we're writing this piece. All right, so we see an opening curly brace. We're at the beginning of one of our objects. So what do we do when we're at the beginning of one of our objects? Well, first, we're going to ask the question, because remember, we are collecting an object inside of our answer string. And we want those to be delimited by our crazy delimiter. All right. This is actually Carnival Cruise Line in simplified Chinese. This is just what the Unicode looks like when you put it on the screen. So anyways, they're searching for it. But only if the length of answer is not equal to 0, are we going to put that delimiter in there. Why? Because the very first object we're going to put in there, we want to just put that object into answer, not start it off with our crazy delimiter, right? The crazy delimiter sits between objects. So when we have our very first object, we want to just capture it. All right. So what this guy basically says is, if this is not our first object, go ahead and tack on our delimiter, and then we're going to tack on our object. Well, how do we get the object? Well, we call this .getObject. We already have a function that knows how to get objects. So we're going to ask him to get our object. We're going to give him the entire JSON. We're also going to give him the current value of start pause. All right. Now, somewhere down here at the bottom, we're still inside of our loop here. Our loop says, while start pause is less than JSON.length. So inside this while loop, we might be chugging, remember the dance? We might be chugging along all the way to the end of the JSON. But in this particular case, we expect that we're going to bump into opening curly braces sometimes. And when we bump into an opening curly brace, we're going to call get object, and he's going to presumably collect the next several characters until he returns. And he's going to return a string representation of the meat inside of that object. So the stuff that's inside the opening, closing curly braces that we had seen before. So he's going to return that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the length of that guy, whatever was returned to us, and we're going to add it to the position that we're currently standing in. So that's going to allow us to jump past it for the next loop through the while loop because we've already collected that guy. That make sense? So that's what's happening right here. So we're going to go ahead and add our delimiter if needed. Only going to be needed after the first time. Then, regardless of whether we needed the delimiter or not, we'll go ahead and ask get object to give us the string inside of the opening and closing curly braces. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to update start pause so I could jump past the string we just collected. Then I'm going to tack on what we collected onto our answer. All right. Otherwise, if we're looking at a comma, what are we going to do? We will move past that comma, although I am incrementing here, right? So since we're incrementing here at the end, we actually don't need to skip past the comma because we're, if I'm looking at a comma right now, tell me why we do need to skip past it. I lied. I said one thing, then I said we don't have to do that. Now I'm telling you we actually do have to do that. Why? If I'm standing at a comma right here, I'm looking at a comma, and we don't want to do anything with commas. That happens to be the arbitrary guy that's separating our objects, right? I want to move past this comma so that I don't sit here and keep infinite looping on the comma that's in front of me. Why do I have to increment start pause here? When we actually increment why do we have to increment start pause here? When we're always incrementing start pause at the end. Go ahead. Yeah, it has to do with how continue works. Continue says, do not do anything else in this pass through the loop. Just go back up to the top of the loop, which means we will never get to this line. Because continue says skip the rest of this guy and move on. Which means if we were a for loop, where our I++ or whatever, our start pause ++ was at the top, then this would work. Because that's part of the structure of the for loop. So the next spin up would have you do that. But in this case, we're inside of a while loop. While loops separate their structures. So inside of a while loop, see, at least he did his sleeping outside of class. Oh, he was here. He was here. He just went and took a nap real quick. It was a power nap. He doesn't like being called out in class. All right. So because of the way continue works, if we ever want to move past this comma, we kind of need to do our kind of one-off ++ right here. All right, that makes sense? So that'll allow me to hop past this guy and then start the loop again. All right, so that's what we'll do. We'll get past the comma, so we won't get stuck there. That's actually a pretty interesting problem because this would be something, did any of you run into infinite loop on comma issues when you did your homework? Or was just, you ran into so many homework that you don't even remember. All right, so this is actually a really good example because this kind of bug is one of those bugs that might be hard to track down, right? Because it's kind of like hidden in there, right? And it's easy to get tripped up in it. So this is why it's fun to dance through your code. You can draw pictures, but it's more fun to dance, right? All right. I have seen it. some professor makes a student come up and do some crazy dance for the. All right, so we'll plus there just to jump past our comma. It'll loop back up. We'll keep going. So then we'll hit some white space maybe. Now keep in mind right here, we're only doing anything special if we're looking at a a closing square bracket, an opening curly brace. We don't look for closing curly braces because getObject handles that for us. We might run into commas. We might also run into white space, right? So here's a question. Do we even need to ask about commas? We are collecting objects, and we do that right here. We are stopping at the end of arrays. We do that right here. We know that objects are collections, or arrays are collections of JSON objects. So now, if every single time through here, I either respond to this or I respond to this, let's skip this guy for a second, or I just move on. So if I'm walking through this guy and I don't see a closing square bracket and I don't see an opening curly brace, I'm just going to skip. I'm not collecting it inside of answer. I'm not doing anything with it. I'm just moving to the next character. Whether it was a comma or a space, whatever it was, I don't want it. That makes sense? So I actually don't have to have this thing to deal with commas because really the thing I'm doing with commas is the thing I want to do with everything that isn't a opening curly brace or a closing square bracket. I want to just ignore it. So we'll actually take this else if off of here. So we're only going to do something when I see the beginning of an object or I see the end of an array. Otherwise, I'm always just going to do start plus plus. Keep moving along. All right. Now we know, because we're the ones writing this, that this is the line. If we make the assumption that our JSON is properly formed JSON, we know that that is the line that will ultimately get returned. Why did we put this guy in here? Go ahead. Yep. So up here, we are in a strongly typed language. This is not a Java thing. This is a thing that is true of all strongly typed languages. When we define a function in a strongly typed language, we must say this is what this function will return. We have to say that. And if we say it, if we're not going to return anything, we put void, right? Otherwise, we put the kind of thing we're going to return. If we're advertising we're returning a string array, we have to return a string array. Strongly typed languages will scream at us if we don't return something. Now, we are inside of a while loop. While loops, if you remember from way back early on in coding 1, while loops are what are called pre-check loops, right? Which means we check the Boolean expression. We check the guy that while loop operates off of. We check him before we execute that loop even one time. All right. So even though we know that the data this guy is working on will get into this loop because we have stuff, we have objects inside of our JSON, we know we'll get in here. We also know, because we have properly formed JSON, that we will eventually get into that if statement. So we know that we will indeed eventually return a string array. But Java doesn't know that we know that. So Java's like, look, as written, there is a chance that you never get into this while loop or that you exit this while loop without ever getting into that if statement. Those are possibilities because of the nature of if statements and the nature of loops. Therefore, Java's going to scream at us unless we do something like this. Now, we can actually bypass this. You can do something called throws a runtime exception. So a runtime exception deals with things that happen during runtime but don't necessarily require a try catch. Because sometimes it's like frustrating when you're doing something simple and you're working with an object and that object technically could have a problem like file not found or something like that, but you're like, look, the file's there. Don't make me write all this try catch crap in order to do something. So that's when you get lazy. You just tell main to throw exception and you just keep passing the buck. There are ways of us for us to manipulate exceptions to not have to just return something, but this costs us nothing, right? Here at the end, we're saying, look, if I'm still here, which I know I won't be, but if I'm still here, Java wants me to return something, so I'm going to return null. Null, being the empty object, does count as a string array because when we look at the hierarchy of object-oriented languages, you have the idea of an array down here, and arrays are subclasses of something else, which are subclasses of something else, which are subclasses of something else, which are objects at the very top level. And a variable built for holding an object that doesn't have a value in it has a value of null by default. All right. So it is legal for us to always return a null, and it will adhere to whatever return type we had in there because any object that doesn't have a value in it is in fact null. If you try to use the value, like don't try to start making calls on a null value. So if we are intending to return a string array and we give it a null value and you try to take a peek at bucket 3 in that string array, so you're asking nothingness to tell you what he's holding in bucket 3. We should keep our expectations of what he's going to tell us to a minimum, right? Make some sense? All right. So, seems like this should do what we needed to do. Where we are going to keep trucking, collect object, so on and so forth. We finally hit that closing square bracket. As we've been collecting objects, we've been stacking them up inside of answer, separated by our crazy stuff. Finally, when we hit the end of our array, we go ahead and split on that crazy stuff. Remember, split is a function built into the string class. It is, as we're calling it here, so answer is a string, right? Right here, here's answer is a string. Now, when we look at split, is split a field, a method, or a constructor? It's a method. Okay, we know because it's not the name of the class, seemingly, because it's not uppercase, and it has the parentheses stuff. That makes it a method. All right. Do you think it's a static method or a non-static method? If we went and looked at the string class, string.java from Oracle, Sun Microsystems, whatever, and we were to scroll down to the split function, or if we go into the documentation for the string class and we scroll down to the split method, will it have the word static in front of it or not, and why?
Need a flash.
Okay, this is already started off poorly.
You don't need flash to call it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes.
So that's the second sentence. That's the second sentence you need to say. That's the why. So is it going to have static or not going to have static? No static. Well, why are you guessing? But you do. You just gave me the correct second sentence.
Well, I don't know.
Like living on Mars over there.
I got that right.
Yeah. All right. So when we look at split and we look at the way we're calling split with an instance of the string class, not the string class itself. Therefore, since this doesn't have the red squiggly, it's not an error message, right? Therefore, split must be something that gets called by an instance of the class in which it was defined rather than the class name itself. Therefore, it will not have the keyword static. The keyword static means this method is owned by the class itself. Therefore, we would call it with string.split if it was static. Since that's not how we're calling it, it must not have static in front of it. Okay? And that's a true statement. It won't have static in front of it. We won't waste your time going and looking at it. All right, so we're going to split. Split ultimately gives me a string array that splits on this crazy stuff. All right, and that's the guy I'm going to return. And what I have advertised I'm going to return is a string array. We're all cool, right? All right. So now let's see if we have finished doing our job. So what do we say to do in driver? We read in our file, yada, yada, yada. We feed in all the stuff. We build our my first JSON parser dot parse. Parse here, is this a field method constructor? Or cat or dog, whatever let's go cat, dog, or method.
Cat dog.
Those were two separate options. She even gets that wrong. All right. So this guy is being called by what looks like a class name because it starts with a capital letter. Therefore, if we went and looked at our version of parse, because that's the class, I see my first JSON parser, we wrote that. So if I go look at parse, I should see static in front of it because I'm calling it using the name of the class. So I go in here, we go down to parse, wherever I have parse, up to parse. Here's parse right here. Parse takes a string in as a parameter. That's the string we read in from our file. And this guy is static. So we call it using the name of the class in which he was defined. All right. So we're going to call my first JSON parser.parse on our string representation of what was in our file. What does this guy do? He starts marching through here. He says, we know every single JSON object, a properly formed JSON object has at least one name value pair, right? Then you have that top level name value pair. If we glance at our stuff here, we see that at the very top here, here. We have this opening parenthesis, and here's our name, and here's the value associated with that name, that whole array. So we have a single name value pair at the top level that is a variable named ships, and it's associated with an array, a JSON array. All right. So what am I going to do with that? Well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim the JSON. Trim is a non-static method that belongs to the string class because we're calling it with an instance of string. And what it does is it cuts off all white space. So like, tabs and carriage returns and just spaces, all sorts of stuff like that. It cuts it off either end of that string. It does nothing in the middle. All right. That way we know we're dealing with a string without extra crap, extra spacing and stuff like that. So then we call our get object JSON passing at number 1. So that allows us to step past that opening curly brace, right? Okay, so now we're calling get object. What does get object do? Starts walking through our string. It's looking for an opening curly brace. Is it going to find, if we find an opening curly brace, it's going to call get object. That will handle objects inside of objects, even though we don't have those in this case. So actually, we won't run into this guy here with our current JSON. It is a legal thing to ask because you can have JSON objects inside of JSON objects. Our data just doesn't have that represented. If we're at the end of a JSON object, then we return what we've collected trimmed. If we're looking at a comma, we just continue, and there's a possibility here. We want to continue on commas or spaces, right? Just like we did previously. So if I'm walking through something and I run into a comma, I want to not do anything with that. If I run into a space, I want to not do anything with that. So we can actually probably take out that continue. Commas are meaningless to us. They're just as meaningless as spaces. If I'm looking at an opening array, then we're going to call get array, passing it the step right past that guy. Otherwise, we're just going to tack on the character we're dealing with. Now, with that in mind, if we were that would have had us collecting commas, collecting spaces. Yeah, it's okay for now. Our data is not going to break that. All right, so that's what get object does. So ultimately, when we return from our get array, so once we hit this guy right here and we return our string array, that is what's going to come back right here. When we call get array and he does all his stuff, eventually he's going to finish and he's going to send us back that string array. We're going to capture it here inside of temp. We're not doing anything with it yet, but we're capturing it inside of temp. Now, just so we can see our answers here, let's go ahead and let's iterate through that array. I'll go ahead and actually show you a for each loop in Java real quick, just because that's convenient in this particular case. So in Python, you might say for S in this array of strings, right? In Java, you say for string S. Oh, it was like a chiropractic adjustment thing. String S, and then you put a colon, and then you give it the collection. So in this case, it's temp. And we'll like that. So we'll do s dot, sorry, system dot out dot println. And we'll go ahead and print S. All right. And eventually we run out of stuff in this guy, and we will just go ahead for right now. We're just going to return the empty string. We don't, the output of that isn't important to us right now. We're testing to see if our array functionality is working. All right, so let's see how we did here. All right, anybody want to tell me the error I put here on purpose that you didn't solve? Probably, are you sure? All right. If JSON was an array, dot length is correct since it's a string. So in this case, for arrays, the dot length does not have parentheses because it's a field inside the array class. For strings, length is a method.
Yeah, right.
What found? Oh, no, hold on. Array required, but string found. So this is at this line right here. JSON is a string. We are checking a position, otherwise we're returning answer dot split this guy. But that return statement oh, we'll let Python guy over there tell me what the issue is here. What's wrong with that? So in Java, to get a character in a string, we use char at. Well, JSON is the name of our string. It could be LOL or whatever. That's just the name that we named our string. We want to get char at start pause. We want to do the same thing down here. So this is really like Python syntax where strings are treated similar to arrays. No, it's just how the language works. They're both collections. Non-static variable, this cannot be, oh. Get object right here where I say this dot get object. This is a static method. I'm sorry, get object is a static method. So we call it using the class name itself. Or since we're currently inside of a static method, our current context is a static context. So we don't need the this dot. Same issues, same issue. Here's the this dot get object. We'll just let it keep taking us from issue to issue. Same issue. This dot get array is the same issue. Oh, S is already defined. So we'll say SSSS, four S's. Of course not. We'll call it LOL. We'll print out LOL because S was already taken up above. Unmatched, so our split, this line right here, it didn't like our split function here. Unlimited, unmatched closing open parenthesis. So it looks like using a parenthesis in our split string might not be allowed. Let me just dump that parenthesis real quick and see if he's happier with it. He is, but we didn't seem to capture any strings. All right, let me look at this because I have to run down and meet her. I'll figure out what the error is here, and I'll send a link to the code as well as the link to, well, as well as a description of what the error is. It's probably just a place where I wasn't collecting a string or I didn't pass the right thing. It's probably one or two lines. But I'll do that. Remember, 10 a.m. and S107 across the hall is the lecture on, introduction to AI, let's say, from our guest lecturer. Please show up if you can so you can support and pick potentially your next teacher. All right, questions, comments, concerns, bribes. What's up? Well, what do you mean?
This one, but then you're thinking,
Yeah, so this guy's a string. Answer.split returns a string array. Split, that function, returns a string array. Yeah, I mean, split has a different return type. Split does something to answer. All right, I will see everybody on Tuesday. As of right now, no homework unless there's a poor turnout in S107. Guest lecture today in 1 hour from now in S107 across the hall.
Okay.
That's fine. If you have class, don't skip class. So, but if you just have to go to skip breakfast or something or miss a nap time, come and nap in class.
Dang it. Dr. Lincoln, I have a question.